Buongiorno tartarughe. If we could begin to get ourselves ready to sit down. Questo treno è un po' ritardo. How are you doing? Yeah, we enjoyed Naomi yesterday. It was a lot of fun. Great.
Naomi was appropriate for that session, no? It was healthy.
Yeah, that was very good. It worked out very good. Yeah.
Excellent.
I hope we feel better again. Thank you for your work.
Sorry? Well, thank you. Yeah, I'm the reason I'm kind of conserving my energy today. Yesterday I walked all around and with a different pair of shoes on. So I'm saving myself up because Saturday, like, really had the combo. So I want to be able to get through the plane ride so I can lie on my back and rest for a whole week, which was what the doctor.
Talk to the doctor
Yeah,
about
yeah.
muscle relaxer.
Well, I have muscle relaxants and stuff like that. I can't take them at the moment because I'll fall asleep here. So, yeah, but I do have a quarter of an oxygen.
So, okay, I'll just.
Thank you so very much.
Hi, Penny. Sean, available for September.
Ow. David, do you mind taking one of these and passing it?
No.
Thank you. Floy will help out. Floy always helps. Good morning. If we could all get ourselves seated and ready to roll. So good morning. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Brian Kelly, and I'll be your host for this morning and this afternoon for the final round of thesis reviews here today. And before we get started, just give the order of the day here. As I say your name and identify you, if you just raise your hand. Yesterday I was walking around doing this. It kind of killed me. So we're happy to have a really nice group of reviewers today. Jason Abbey, who is a principal at Perkins Eastman, is right over there. William Bonstra, who is a principal at Bonstra Hair Sign Architects, right there. Bill? Okay, Bill. I thought we were being formal here. Over here, closest to me is David Gloucester, who is the Director of Education for the Royal Institute of British Architects, in from London for the next couple of days. Really appreciate having you here. We have Barbara Molyneux, who is principal at Perkins Eastman. Barbara, you down there? Yeah, there she is. Also an alumna of the program. Then we have Lee Quill of Cunningham Quill Architects here in DC, principal in that firm. This afternoon, we'll be joined by Antonio Rebello, and then Denny Ruggieri, who's at the far end down there, who's an associate professor in the landscape architecture program here at UMD. And again, later this afternoon, we'll have Roger Schwabacher joining us, who's a design principal from HOK Architects. I apologize to those of you in the audience that our programs today are in black and white. If you wish, you can color them in. We'll get you some color pencils. Our color printer is on the fritz, I am told. I'm not sure who Fritz is, but we'll figure that out. But we have these, we can get by with this. This morning, we're going to be looking at two projects that deal with the theme of aging malls or malls that are now no longer viable. And the proposition here is what to do with them after their useful life has come to conclusion. And our first contestant here will be Raphael Sanabia. And yeah, it's easier to say standing up than it is to sitting down, right? And his chair was Professor Marcus Cross, who's in the second row, and his committee was comprised of Michael Abrams and myself. And we're going to be at Marley's Resurrection, or Marley's Crossing, I guess is the name of the original mall, in Anne Arundel County, and Arundel, for those of you from the other side of the pond, county. We say things very differently here. In just not too far away in Maryland. So I'm going to be quiet. Raphael, we all experience these kind of digital things. There's always a hiccup, but break a leg up there. Okay?
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. Happy Thursday. It is a pleasure to be here in front of you all. My name is Raphael Sanabia, and I will be presenting to you my thesis, Marley's Resurrection, Reimagining an Anne Arundel County Community Hub. So before we get started, I kind of wanted to do a little bit of audience engagement. So who has ever been to a shopping mall by a show of hands? I figured. Yes, I have. Yes. Have you ever been? Yes. Oh, I never ever? Yeah. And kind of following that, are you familiar with the mall that is now considered to be dead? Or in other words, has the mall lost its appeal with its surrounding community or no longer open? Show of hands to that. Okay. So traditionally, we probably know most of our malls that are still open to look kind of something like this. These large centers where there's a lot of retail, there is some, food options, and, it's kind of just a place that, for many of us, we've had some sort of point in our childhood or our adulthood to be and shop and, be immersed with our family or our friends. But kind of taking it a step back even further, believe it or not, the idea of the shopping mall has been around much longer than we think. We saw this very early on with ancient Greek agoras, where there were these open spaces and gathering places or marketplaces near residential that were emphasized by their landscape and their unique architecture and location to other things. So it's another interesting way to kind of look at it. And then kind of moving forward, Europe would also continue to adapt this typology over time in Paris, where we see these Paris passages, these glass-covered arcades, and in the late 18th century, really becoming one of the most diverse shopping and dining destinations with access to social space, access to natural light, a lot of things we as humans enjoy. But one of the most notable is where it transitions into America and where we see the Southdale Center in Edina, Minnesota by Victor Gruen that really changed the way that the mall was viewed here in America. And really for the rest of the 20th century, often indicated as the golden age of malls, where by the 1970s, malls were often being built very, very often, almost everywhere you could look within your local neighborhood between a mall or a strip mall. And so that's kind of just another view of that. But however, with 21st century elements such as the rise of fast fashion, high maintenance costs, outdated environments, and a lack of consumer needs or amenities of interest, many of these golden era shopping malls have become dead zones in our communities. Which really leads to my thesis question: are dying shopping mall sites an ideal place to create the modern community hub? So just to kind of give a sense of context, we're located in Glen Burnie, Maryland, in Anne Arundel County. The site is right here, and it is nestled really in between Maryland State Route 100 and Maryland Route 2, otherwise known as Governor Ritchie Highway. This is a very suburban part of Ritchie Highway, even though there is a large strip mall shopping center here, Southdale Shopping Center with various retailers. And then around the site is a lot of historic single-family homes, such as the historic Oakwood Park neighborhood, as well as the Martindale neighborhood, Girard Plaza across the street. But I think one of the most notable and really interesting things about this site is that the Baltimore-Annapolis Trail actually runs around it right here, which is actually the line of the former Baltimore-Annapolis Railroad. So this is just a aerial view and a really interesting image that I really love that I think really describes this mall for what it is at night. Very much a dead zone. You can just see within the parking lot, the mall is very neglected, and it's very much so in a sea of parking that could much better be utilized. And just to kind of show you kind of the dynamic of the mall, this was the mall on opening day in 1987, and this is a typical day presently of the mall. Very sad, and a very much so a mall that once had its high day, but now is no longer serving its local community. So ultimately, this is a 22-acre site vying for redevelopment in Anne Arundel County. I wanted to give a little bit more site context analysis for you all, just to kind of get more of a feel for it, so you can see in the figure ground just how large of a scale the mall was and is built in its current context around its surrounding, as well as the land use with like what I was saying earlier, a lot of single-family homes and residential that surround it, along with the commercial. And then just another set of diagrams kind of showing the districts and adjacencies, kind of tying with the diagrams before. And another really interesting thing about this site is that it is a 5-minute walking radius. So the site is about a quarter-mile big, and which provides really great opportunity for a new community to be built when you think about the ideal 5-minute walk for a place. And within a half a mile, you can see how many communities it reaches just within its span. So really, the scope of this project is to redevelop the dead Marley Station site into a lively, modern, intergenerational communal hub that meets its needs, along with Anne Arundel County's Plan 2040 goals for the county overall, specifically in Region 3, where this site is. And Plan 2040 is Anne Arundel County's general development plan, which aims to, by 2040, across various sectors, have the county become more green, smart, and equitable. Another key scope I would say for this project is definitely connecting and weaving the site back into its adjacent neighborhoods and natural elements like the Baltimore-Annapolis Trail, which is heavily used by many of the locals there. I will say about the Baltimore-Annapolis Trail, you can't see it in this map, but there truly is no crosswalk or a safe way coming off the trail to get onto this site. Even though the JCPenney right here is not, is kind of right in front of it, the door for JCPenney is not even close to it, and you're crossing over several rows of parking just to even get to an entrance that will take you anywhere near it. So that's just another thing I wanted to note. All right. So this is just a little bit of some of the demographics of the area. Median income, the average age, average home value, and just a little bit of the race breakdown. So Region 3 is really interesting in that they've done, and by they, the Office of, the county's Office of Planning and Zoning has done a lot of community engagement to find out what they need. And one of the quotes that really stuck out with me as I was doing my research is that this major mall, someone said, a resident, that this mall was once vibrant and busy and an economic driver. It has since become the white elephant of Glen Burnie and has the potential as the site could be further advanced. Another person said that they need more youth and community centers. The kids don't have anything to do. Their parents can't take them after school, and they need more social and emotional support programming. And another interesting point of view for this was a millennial that's moving into the area and said that they want to eat and socialize at home. They need restaurants, they need a pub, they know that the chain restaurants on the highway for Glen Burnie are always ample in there, but they want smaller places, local places. So that kind of led to the foundational drivers that I aim to achieve with this thesis, and that is opportunity, reimagine, growth, and sustainability also. up there. And really thinking about the community's needs. So thinking about affordable housing, which was something that came up, better connections between people and nature, user engaging activities for all intergenerations, economic drivers, and also giving those that are local ownership and passion, bringing new life back into the site. So starting off with opportunity, one of the really awesome key things that kind of helped me think about the idea of the 5-minute site was the ideal neighborhood unit or 5-minute walking analysis by urban planner Clarence Perry, who really thought a lot about community center placement along with, especially if it was off of a main highway, how you can think about developing an ideal community within this sort of shell, if you will. And then also in my Part T diagram, really looking at taking the existing 3 entrances and exits off of Maryland Route 2, Governor Ritchie Highway, and thinking about how to weave that back through the site, and then also how we can get people to the Baltimore-Annapolis Trail, and then also linking the 2 existing undeveloped overflow parking lots at the front of the site that line Governor Ritchie Highway, and how we can get those back integrated as well. Reimagine. And that is where this new master plan came, which is really, I believe, a true testament of bringing in the community from all sides, really thinking about interconnecting back with nature and really giving the site a new life and a new identity that it deserves. And just for community, creating new spaces and streets where people are safe, people feel accepted, welcome. You see neighbors out on the sidewalk. You see people, bringing new green life back into this place, really thinking about how we can create this ideal community within all the surrounding, really making it feel like it was never really not there. And then also just generally growth and sustainability, thinking about how we can create a place that speaks to all and can last, something that unfortunately that the mall built in 1987 could not do. That's a very short lifetime for a building, for it to become what it is today. And with that, thank you. I look forward to our conversation.
I'll just remind the reviewers of 2 things. I'm going to pass the microphone around. You have to kind of hold it like this and speak directly into it. And one other thing is that everything you say here and do here will be heard on YouTube and Facebook because we are simulcasting this live. So you might just think about that beforehand. Okay. Nobody said anything naughty yesterday, but I'll just pass this over to. Let's start.
Thank you very much. No further comments. I can start if you like. Raphael, thanks. You suddenly finished, and I was expecting a little bit of dissection of what the elements of the master plan were, because although I've been reading this, I don't really yet feel that I know what's in it and why. Also, just from a point of view of resource efficiency, you've got this enormous sprawling footprint of the old Marley Mall on site. Is that going? That's going to be leveled? Because these are, you see, the thing is, when you're designing something, you're super close to it, and you take these big moves, and that's a big move.
Yes.
For granted.
Yes.
I'm a slow learner. I need to be told these things. Otherwise, I might think I'm being stupid and there's something I don't understand. So, if you could 90 seconds,
Yes,
just going through that plan, I think would be helpful.
Actually, even a little bit longer than 90 seconds would be
Absolutely.
good. 'Cause
I'm sorry for the
David
cutoff.
is too. We'd like a little more, because part of your numbers got cut off over here.
Yes.
So when I was looking at number 17, sorry, when I was looking at number 17, it was cut off, and over here it was janitor's closet. So I know that was not the case. So
No.
if you could take us through that.
Absolutely. So this is Governor Ritchie Highway, and the main entrance, or the most hierarchical entrance, I would say, in the design is this, the middle entrance, which is a continuation of Marley Station Road coming into the site. This is the center green, so this is the anchor of the new community. These buildings right here are mixed-use development. So they are ground floor retail with 3 stories of residential above. These 2 are multifamily buildings only, 3 stories. Then we have townhome communities on both sides. This is the new library starting off, and then eventual expansion to become the full community center with a recreation wing as well as a event hall. And doing some discussions with some folks that I have met with in the county, there's actually been a need for a new event hall since several of the local restaurants along Governor Ritchie Highway further south have closed, where a lot of quinceañeras and a lot of other members of different diverse communities used to use to celebrate. So this is in honor of giving them a new place here. Here we have the recreation lawn within the the community park. So this is the community pool. We have volleyball courts, pickleball, tennis, and basketball courts. Over here are the dog parks. So this is a large dog park, and this is a small dog park. A children's playground. This is a meditation space. All of these hugged by nature, really to kind of continue that green feel along the edge of the site and really continue to make the site feel hugged. Up here is the community garden. And within this proposal, as well as a continuation of the Baltimore-Annapolis Trail, there currently is a dirt path that a lot of folks use to kind of cut into the site currently. So this thesis proposal actually paves that or uses like a permeable paver to continue that extension into the site, allowing folks to enter in and experience the major east-west axis that's created that is not currently there. And then over here is a kind of picnicky grill area for members of the community to kind of have either cookouts or celebrate with each other. And then up here, these are small business pods. So actually in the mall currently, there are several small businesses like barbershops and nail salons and hair braiders that currently do not get the foot traffic that they deserve. So this thesis proposes giving them space here fronting Ritchie Highway that really will allow them, or even if they want to be in the mixed use development, give them a chance to really come outside those concrete walls and really have a chance to become visible again, to bring their business up. And then one of them also was cut off as well, but this is an existing Royal Farms on the site, which I decided to keep as an amenity and a local resource for the cars. We know that we can't get rid of cars completely. So, and the Royal Farms is also fairly new. So keeping in mind that, wanting to give people the opportunity to get gas as they leave on their commute to get back on Route 100, which is a major east-west thoroughfare connecting to like the 95s, the 29s. And then behind this, which is, I guess, cut off, is Ann's Dairy Cream, which is a 74-year-old local hot dog and ice cream shop that's been there for generations.
Where's that?
It's not shown. It's unfortunately cut off. But yes, they've been there for over 74 years, way before the mall came, and they actually had to fight to stay on the property for the mall before it got developed. So I wanted to give them a safer option for outdoor dining within this proposal, taking away some of the extra parking that they don't really need and creating it as an outdoor space so that their guests don't have to sit on the tables currently on the median that they've that they have, in order to give them a safe space hugged by nature.
Small business, commercial pods.
Yes.
What's the thing from behind it? Sorry.
If you could explain the area that you labeled as one small
Yes.
business commercial pods, it's essentially half of your site is occupied by them. So it's mislabeled?
Is it?
Like,
Number
what are
one-
these? What are these?
Oh my gosh, yes, they are.
Yes.
Yes, these are townhome developments. Yes. Yes, I'm sorry. Yes, these are all
Yeah.
townhome developments. Yes, those that's not small businesses.
Yeah, so
Yes.
you are a very good presenter,
Thank you so much.
and you have you speak with a lot of confidence. I really appreciate what you're saying about the local businesses. Your graphics here are not helping you. You know, the misalignment just
Yes, I'm so
is a little
sorry.
bit of a, I mean, I did my thesis here. I appreciate the anxiety about all of this, but I think you have a lot of the things that people in neighborhoods want. And I think it sounds like, I like these small business pods. I like that you're trying to find a better place for the local barbers and hair braiders and small businesses. Even the things like, I love when there's a big dog park and a little dog park because I don't have any dogs at all. I'm not sure I would want to meditate by the kids, but you seem to have the parts, the connection from in my daily life between the parts is something that I'm thinking could be developed a little bit further. Like I walk out of my townhouse and I want to go to the pool or I want to go to the community garden and just what is that public realm experience like?
Yes.
Can you also point out, I look on your buildings 5 and 6 is where you have ground floor retail.
Yes.
And that's not clear to us right off the bat, and I think that's an important piece. And also, just a quick question, is that the train right away? That is the path and the
I'm sorry, what was
it
the
was
question?
your Main Street or
Uh-huh.
whatever you want to call it. No, the other one going.
This one?
Yes, is that the path of the train?
No.
Oh, I see. I thought that
No.
was the old rails to
No,
trails.
the the trail runs snakes around
Okay.
the site. Yes. And it ends in Annapolis.
Raphael, like Barbara, I could sit here and listen to you speak for hours. It's great. It's a wonderful presentation. I appreciate also the history of malls and what the retail experience has been through time. One thing I would challenge you on is then what is the history of this site? There's we've got a mall there now, but there was probably something that happened before the mall that I think might inform why we're doing what we're doing. You've maintained that is a 40-degree crank in your axis, which is the same orientation of the existing structure. So is there something significant about that we want to play up? Why is that there? All right, you're tying into the local street grid. Smart. That makes a ton of sense, but maybe there's a solar orientation component to that or some other kind of historic recognition that orientation allows for. And when we start talking about those orientations, a lot of these axes that you're setting up have connections. Some of them could be explored a little bit more fully. And what I'm talking about specifically is I see, major terminations where there's no there. Like, why would you go to that spot? There's a turn and a tree. Well, maybe there's something. Those are opportunities to really play up some key components of access, and that's one of the challenges of malls right now is that they have this kind of barrier around them and there's no special spot around any of those particular areas. But that might start to bolster your rationale for maintaining that crank as it exists.
Right. Right.
So I'll say further, I don't know enough about what a commercial pod is, which looks to be the front of your site, because that Ritchie Highway, more than likely is the main car transit, right? So I want to know a little more about what you see there. It's a long bar of something. Is it one story? I don't see it in any of your images. Is
Yes.
it there? I see. Okay. And number two, I think you need to tell us a little more about the connections, and I think you said it very well. I don't know how you get off the highway. It's still an isolated island site. So it doesn't, you haven't stitched it with anything else. It's still an oasis. It's in the middle of the same site that was there as a commercial shopping mall. So I think you have to think about how that also extends into the neighborhoods. You mentioned the street on the top right that sets up your axis. What is
Yes.
that street about? Is that a special street? Is it go somewhere?
So it's a major, I really wouldn't call it it is, I guess it is essentially a major street, but it mostly serves these residential neighborhoods that are up here. And it does cross over Maryland Route 10 and continues more into residential through like Pasadena and all that. But I think to the comment about stitching, for the stitching that was happening beyond the site, my vision for that was really utilizing the trail as a moment for people to kind of be stitched back into the site via the trail. Really wanting to think about everyone who's living up here so that they don't have to take their car. You know, if they don't want, they can use their bike or they can use their, by foot walk to the site. Be engaged and directly come here in the center, or if you want to come here through the park, have those moments. So, and the stitching also does happen here as well with existing residential. Over here are apartment buildings. It's the Americana apartments. And those folks are able to cross Vichy Highway as well into the site and experience as well.
This is a remarkably ambitious project because it's a big piece of ground to plan, number one. Number two, you're dealing with a bunch of different building types. And I think you sort of are starting to get your arms around the sort of building types you do find in the suburbs, which, are obviously these townhouses and these multifamily types and things. And then the one that's a little bit indeterminate to me is the one out on the highway, number one there. I'm not quite sure. I guess that's one story
Yes.
things there, right? Okay. Is there one question, then a comment? Let me ask you a question.
Yes.
What role, did you have a kind of phased plan of the mall, of how the mall might be torn down in phases? Because, the reason I ask that is because these malls, the lease structures of these malls is very complicated. The anchor stores have their own leases and their own parking, actually, usually.
Yes.
And then they don't pay any rent. And then all the sort of inline stuff comes along and they say, well, if you're going to get a Macy's, then we can get this kind of retail and that kind of retail. And they come along and they pay rent, right? And so what happens is that when they get torn down, sometimes the anchor stores stay because the other stuff fails. And this has happened, I think the Lord and Taylor at White Flint happened a little bit like this,
Yep.
which is where the Lord and Taylor stayed in operation for a while anyhow, and then the rest of the mall got torn down. Did you have any kind of interim phases? And then if you can answer that, and then I have just a couple of observations once you do that. Do you have any interim phases about that?
I actually did have a couple interim phases. So it's funny, actually, two of the current, actually, I can show you in this map. These two anchor stores are actually vacant. And so the only two still open are JCPenney and Macy's. But my thought was, as I was having like initial thoughts about maybe keeping one anchor store, potentially doing an adaptive reuse dynamic to the project, the one that I did consider keeping was Sears. And that was kind of based on kind of its orientation in the site and thinking about, there's actually, it kind of sounds a little cheesy, but when I went to go visit the site, I've been to the mall several times, but when I went to visit the site, it was the only vacant anchor store that you could still look inside, and there still felt like some sort of, I don't know, like some sort of connection or like wanting to kind of continue to be a part of this place. So initially I thought, in addition to kind of thinking about it in a design standpoint, how I might want to do it, but eventually it just kind of got to the point where it was kind of creating more of like it was kind of just this big mass that was kind of hard to work around. And so that's when I made that ultimate decision to say.
Well, one of the reasons why I think that's important is because I think maybe one thing that you might think about relative to the reason these malls is reusing these buildings and some of the civic program that you have outlined, the school and all these big event spaces, might be appropriate to find location and repurposed department stores if the structure worked well for that. So it makes me wonder, and it might add a little bit of idiosyncrasy to the plan that would be sort of interesting. The other comment I have is two other ones. One is that, one of the things that is problematic in suburban development is when you have one kind of building type facing across the street of a different kind of building type. And in the city, the types tend to change in the middle of the block, not on the end of the block. And so, there's a really smart reason for that, because it means that when you go out your front door, you're looking at building types that are like yours, and it adds value that way. So I wonder a little bit about that, the way in which some of these types look across the street each other, number one.
Right.
Number two, I disagree with Bill's comment in the sense of integrating it, because I think that one of the things that I think is a challenge in contexts like this is, you have these 1 acre lots and 2 acre lots spread around like bad urban acne everywhere and stuff. And I actually think that a project like this gets better if it is more distinct.
Right.
And I think one of the things that jumps out at your illustrative plan very strongly is the landscape. And I think that if the landscape was more developed as a kind of something that one could enjoy in its entirety at its edge, that was something that bounded the project more definitively, I think it makes it better. Because it separates it from, and it doesn't mean is disconnected from things around. You can still have street connections. But I think if the landscape was the thing to define the perimeter and the edges, the project the definition of it gets a whole lot better. And the place where I think it would make the most difference is out on the highway, not 100, but 32. And that those one-story jobs there, I think, are not the most visually sort of pleasing things to sort of be the front door of the neighborhood.
Right.
And I actually think you could have a landscape front there. I guess you save the one curvy road from the mall there. That would be kind of a nice kind of front there, to have a park with a curvy edge on it like that, and then take whatever the program is in those number ones and put them on your main street, and really let that sort of separation, it could still be connected with your street network, but you come into the community through a park, which I think would be a very, very significant plus.
Thank you.
I'd like to speak to the landscape eventually.
Yes. So part of this island concept, and thanks for your input, Matt. I appreciate that greatly. I think that this is overly formal, and I think the formality goes nowhere. And it's the ring road, right? So what I think, if you have a connection here and maybe a connection here of community, then this doesn't go here. This goes here and becomes the pathway from all this other stuff, right?
Right.
And I got news for you. This isn't going to be here very long, right? We know that it's going to spread. Okay. So you should think, and I think somebody mentioned the idea of phasing.
Right.
So this is a catalyst. You want a catalyst here
Right.
for change, and not just on my island,
Right.
but all the way through. And that's why I think this is it's ambitious, and I agree with that.
Yes.
It's ambitious. There's a lot more to do than you probably can do.
Yes. Time ended
Yes.
quickly.
Now, you also, buildings change about streets and alleys.
Right.
I don't know where your alleys are. I don't know where your service is. I think you've got retail all around these boxes. Well, that doesn't work. You have to have some loading.
Right.
Where do the
Right,
goods
right.
come in? That
Right.
usually comes in service, maybe below.
Right.
If you're in Chicago, the old city's down. And so, think about those things.
Right.
And then you can sort of string things on necklaces
Right.
around the site without, building this new city
Right.
with the Grand Boulevard and that kind of thing.
I can just add to what Matt Bell just said. I think that the landscape, I was looking for like a landscape strategy. I think I can understand the figure ground. I can question maybe, where the mid-block kind of transition happens. but the landscape to me is really missing, and you can see it in that reconnection to nature. There's like this kind of a green sort of blob, but then your illustrations show a little bit of a different story. I don't know if it's even true to the real story, because look at the spacing of these trees. You know, like they're about 100 feet apart, and then when you look at, you know, this, you know, they're not. So there's a little bit of, it's barren. So I feel like if you really, the next step would be to look at the landscape, at what it can do.
Right.
For instance, in terms of microclimate, this is a very hot sort of region. Baltimore and all of the, you know, Maryland is going to suffer from increased heat.
Right.
We're, you know, 1.5, you know, degrees Celsius by 2050. So, I mean, we're subject to that. The other thing that's missing is water. Like actual, all of these streets serve a purpose. Even traditional streets, they have curb and gutter because that's where water, stormwater flows. Your landscape right now, it's sort of a vignette of what a landscape could be. But, you know, if you started to add, you know, maybe a little bit of stormwater management here, some rain gardens, you can start to think about how water might congregate in the center of a park.
Right.
Then I think you add this kind of element of identity.
Right.
And last, sustainability. Like the sustainability dimension is really unclear to me. And I think that's the next step as a professional to start thinking about,
Right. Right.
both in terms of like, you know, carbon sequestration, but also like, you know, you have a structure that you basically just erased to recreate new buildings. So that to me is also like almost you start from a negative balance of sustainability already by not having, and it would have been interesting to see how if you know, a new cutting through these landscape, you know, this big building might lead to a different fabric, than a different street system. And that, you know, because of the symmetry, I think you got stuck with then, you know, something that I think would have a hard time to be sort of adopted as a sustainable design, I think. But I think it's one step away.
Yeah, I think there are lots of great ideas, and I appreciate what Matt said is that um, this was incredibly ambitious, and you picked a bunch of different typologies, all of which could be studied, you know, for the whole semester alone. You could just study stormwater management or sustainability or, you know, the percentage of green space to buildings. That could have been one project.
Right.
You could have studied townhouse and, you know, takes on different kinds of townhouse models. Like your townhouses are too wide. Townhouses aren't that wide. They're like 20 feet, maybe 18 feet,
It
you
may have
know,
just-
and so,
Yeah.
you know, you could have just studied that. So, you know, but again, I think the thing that I appreciate is this kind of focus on things that are uniquely interesting to the community. I mean, libraries are incredibly well used in a lot of neighborhoods.
Right.
They are really community centers.
Yes.
And I appreciate you identifying it as that. And the kind of strip mall along Route 2, it kind of amuses me, honestly, because it's kind of the anti-big store model.
Yes.
And it goes to what you've identified as a lot of community uses and small business uses that are you know, it's a ethnic neighborhood. There are a lot of entrepreneurial people. Um, I I think identifying that as a need in this resurrection is a really powerful idea. I think some of Matt's points to the park, how cars actually use them, how people, if I'm driving up Route 2, how do I get to my barber shop? If I'm stopping to pick up some bagels, where do I park? You know, but again, that's a whole typology you could have done a whole semester on.
Well, I was just going to, it made me think of something that I think is true of sites like this. You know, at one level, I'm like, I look at those number one sites and I think, gee, I'd really like that to be a landscape up there. But then Barbara brings up an interesting point, which is that in contexts like this, you're trying to make walkable urbanism, but when you're out in the middle of nowhere like this, it's really hard to do, right? And so there are certain kinds of concessions you have to make to an automobile-oriented life. You can't just wish it away, right?
Right.
So I think those number ones there could work. if they had a service road in front of them with some parallel parking, you see this a lot in older suburban developments where you have a kind of small retail front. Cleveland Park, the Park and Shop in Cleveland Park is an example of that. You know,
Okay.
where you have these kinds of things that they're part of a kind of concession to an automobile, and you could maybe have your cake and eat it too, where that stuff was facing the highway. You probably have too much of it. Those number one, but that's an immense amount of that stuff. And,
Okay.
a third of that would be just fine,
Gotcha.
and so you kind of do that up there, and then probably what would work good, and somebody mentioned it about the retail being all over the place, just keep your retail confined to this, to right there,
Gotcha.
because it's really hard to do retail off the main street,
Ah,
and when retail doesn't, not around the whole building, and when retail fails, it goes dark.
mhm.
And people walk by and they get kind of creeped out and stuff,
Right,
and so
right.
sometimes making less of something is better than making a lot more of it, because
Mm.
when you make less of it, it can raise the value of it in a way. There's only so much of this, and therefore we got to use it well. So you could probably do a scheme whereby you might have a little bit of drive-in stuff here, there, concentrate your retail really along that, and then load up, whether you use an old department store or this, load this stuff up so you get more kind of different activities like the library. I might have these other things maybe interspersed in other places here so that there's not all of it at one end, maybe, so that it animates that street. And I think then, I guess one of the suggestions I would make would be to cut the program down, particularly the retail program down, and say, let's focus it in a way that it's going to have more jaywalking, you know what I mean? More sort of people crossing streets because there's, kind of activity and a buzz about the place rather than the stuff being like you took a paint can of retail and poured it all over the place.
Right.
Give this fellow a chance.
David and I started by just asking to explain, so we have some comments and would like to make. I'd like to hear from David first, and then I'll speak.
Raphael, look, you get off to a great start by identifying an area of study that deserves to be looked at. But the problem is, in amongst your various analyses, you keep throwing up potentially interesting starts, which could give design clues for further development. The trail, you talk about this trail as being significant, then it gets kind of lost in the miasma of what is actually a far, far too ambitious scheme for a thesis project. I mean, there is, all colleagues have talked about the need for editing, and I don't believe you've got the time or the capacity or the inclination to actually look at everything to the degree to which it needs to be studied at this study level. For example, we don't have a single house plan. It's not a deal breaker, but I mean, it's a concern to me that the only building that has any degree of detail in it is the library. Okay, here's the real problem. And it is a problem. And I said it about one of the student schemes yesterday. You seem like a sweet and very charming guy who can give a good and confident presentation. But I think the requirement of graduate students is to have a very, very keenly developed sense of self-criticism. And there are just axial and geometric issues here, which I'm going to say it. I know we're in the postmodern society and we shouldn't have absolutes about anything. It's wrong-minded, the geometry. This is one primary axis and this is the other primary axis. And everything in your renderings is essentially dealing with that axis. But the problem is that axis isn't gathering people. Where are they being gathered from? They're not being gathered from here. I mean, they could be, I guess. They come out of the car and they might be going down there. That's not actually the way you're really drawing it. Why would you be in this area here to be gathered up that axis? So second thing is this is a busy highway, right? You know, I mean, you're Americans. You live in your car. I'm a European. We've developed the use of legs, you know, and so we traverse the city in different ways. We walk in it. Yeah, it's okay. We have our own problems with infrastructure, trust me. But this creates a kind of environmental no-no for me, which paradoxically, your axis is heading right towards. If I were giving you advice on this, I would say that this is an environmental buffer zone. This is an environmental area of potential interest.
Right.
And I just feel the whole thing needs somehow to be swiveled round so that the axes are drawing you into landscaped areas.
Right.
The second thing is this kind of reinvents a certain type of American suburbia, which I kind of thought was not as popular as it used to be. And, you know, the colleagues have talked about, you know, the serviced road row house, and there are good reasons for that.
Right.
It insulates you and your family from the road to some degree. But I mean, this needs to be a garden city. It needs to be a garden city. And I think that is what you're alluding to in your explanation. I'll make one more point, otherwise we're going to overrun hideously. Why was the Mall initially successful? Why did people like the idea of the Mall?
It was a place that they could gather in.
Okay, and what was attractive about the nature of the gathering?
I think it was like I would say at least in Marley Station Mall, it was the central point that you could reach wherever you came from.
Okay, and right, I'm going to track you back to your own presentation. What and why is the Paris Galleria and the London Arcades, why are they still successful? 150, 200 years after they were introduced, why are they successful?
I think they have a timeless sense of, the scale feels timeless, but it also just feels very pedestrian focused.
Right, okay, keep going. Any environmental benefits?
I think you feel safe.
Okay, from? Well, they've got roofs.
Roofs, yes.
Yes, good, okay. So did the Mall. And what you've created here is you've taken one roofed environment where people can feel safe and secure from the weather,
Right.
and you've substituted a series of detached buildings. I'm not going to go here when it rains. Why would I? You know, I've parked my immaculate turquoise candy flake classic Dodge Charger over here, and I'm going to get wet because I want to go to here.
Right, right.
And I think you, as an architect, you have to role play yourself into the users of your buildings and be much more self-critical, much more analytical, and understand all the things that aren't right, as opposed to think, oh yeah, okay, I've got a big plan here. I've got most of the components correct. Anyway, I'm going to stop.
We do a lot of this kind of work, so it's fascinating to watch. And you have a project that will carry you through the rest of your professional life if you use this as something to keep coming back at. There are a lot of great comments, and I agree with a lot of David's comments. But one thing I would challenge you on, a couple things. What's exciting about this, because I didn't do a lot of urban design initially in school, and then I went back and I started studying. You know, I grew up in the suburbs. I grew up in McLean, Virginia, which is across the river, and there's no there. I was born in Alexandria, and I went back to where my roots are now because I wanted a place. And when I look at this, you have this first diagram here, which is starting, it's almost a parody of, you know, the historic model you showed there. But when you take these things, what you want to do are take these lessons that you learn from history and analysis and research. But then there's always a hybrid of what that is. It's almost like you took that diagram and then kind of just laid it here, and that's a first test. But then in looking at the place, the environment, and kind of pulling back out, you did, with the negative figure grounds over here. But that natural corridor of Marley Creek coming in, which you've heard some discussion about that, was something that you might want to explore. There's a lot of diagramming and study of things that when you're doing the early plan, instead of getting to the diagram and the Part T right away, that you should look at a little bit more. And then everything else in true urbanism, there's more of a pod kind of, even called a commercial pod. If I live up where 15 is, up in those townhouses, and I want to go walk my dog, I'm going to have to jump in a go-kart or something, or, a golf cart to get down there, because true urbanism will have that breakdown of parks and things within a 5-minute or very close walk, those kind of things. A lot of things you can study here is what I'll get to. And one other thing I'll just give you some thoughts on. When you're doing graphics such as these, think about how you can grab one and really work it so that the presentation of place, it would be better to have two really great renderings that you spent some time on than all of these. That's kind of something in the future. So I'll look forward to talking to you more, but this is the retrofit of suburban context is really something you'll see for a long time.
Thank you.
Raphael, the word ambitious has been used quite a bit, and I think that sums up what you took on here. Your passion for this site came through over and over again throughout the course of the semester, and I know that, as Lee pointed out, the folks at Anne Arundel County Planning, I know you've already been in touch with them. They will be quite intrigued by what you made of this site. I will take exception with our friend from England. This does actually work in America. Pike and Rose, great example of it. Out in Anne Arundel County, even out in Annapolis. So you did that research. I know there was tons more stuff we could have talked about. I wish you had some street sections up here, but all that withstanding, thank you very much and congratulations on a very nice project.
Thank you, everyone.
Folks, if we could turn and look in this direction, we're going to see the second presentation for today. And for those of you that used to watch The Wizard of Oz on black and white TV, and then eventually saw it in color and realized that everything comes into full Technicolor, I have delivered late our full Technicolor versions of the program. Back over here. So I thought, just a thought as we're getting recentered here, I think just the aspect of being critical is important. And although it does work in the United States, doesn't mean necessarily it ought to work in the United States is another kind of question that we ought to be asking ourselves fully. Colleagues, today we're going to go all the way to the West Coast to another mall that has experienced traumatic decline. And we are in Oregon. I'm just trying to get myself organized here. I have to put my glasses on. We're in Oregon, and the committee on this project was Professor Matthews, who is right there in front of me. Even though I have my glasses on, I can see you. Professor Burke, who was here, there he is over there, and myself. And Jessica Bowers has been looking at an interesting phenomena that is not only about the mall, but it's also about where it's located and the kind of effects of climate change. So Jessica, it's all yours. You must speak into a microphone. There's a microphone right there, just for you. Here, take this one. Oh, you must speak straight into it, like this.
Can
Yeah.
everyone hear me? All right. Well, great. Thank you for the introduction, Professor Kelly. So we've already had the question, where is Oregon? And we're going to dig into that. Where is Medford?
Well, you're still going to find out again. Yeah, yes, an easy question. We're going to get there.
Okay, as long as we're clear, that's what counts. So before we get going, I just want to give a brief summary. You know, we're going to go through the thesis statement. We're going to talk about location. Where is this place? Some of my site analysis, which I learned a lot of interesting things about this place, even though I grew up there. This was an incredibly informative experience for me, as well as my design proposal. You know, what do I think should happen here based on all of that information? So, where is Medford? Let's see. Does the laser pointer work? Not really. Oh, okay. All right, I'm gonna walk over here. So we decided we know where Oregon is. Medford is in the lower western corner, in a smaller county called Jackson County. And what's important about this place is it actually rests almost directly between San Francisco and Portland. So the population of Medford is about 85,000 people, which isn't that many, but because of its location along the I-5 corridor, which is kind of this main artery that runs north-south, it serves a greater population of about 200,000 people from the surrounding towns. And this is really important because a lot of these towns are incredibly rural, so these people are traveling into Medford to get not only entertainment, but necessities as well. Yeah, so this is I-5, and this is Highway 62. And so we've got kind of like an east-west and a north-south that cross right through Medford. Exactly right. Yep. All right. So I do want to call attention to the local geography of this place. It makes it unique. This is called the Rogue Valley, and Medford rests kind of at the bottom of this basin. And that's important because it impacts, you know, some of the topography, some of the ways that people interact with this place, as well as some of the geographic features that we're going to be talking about. So the site that I want to look at in particular in Medford for redevelopment is the Rogue Valley Mall. And like Professor Kelly said, this is a shopping mall. It was constructed in the 1980s, as so many were. It was incredibly popular during its heyday, but it has seen a decline in, you know, the last 15, 20 years, like so many have. But what's important about this place is it actually rests at the crossroads between I-5, that east-west highway that I talked about, and so it's very accessible, and has the potential to be, I think, a thriving hub still, even though it's currently in decline today. One of the other things that I want to call attention to is this lovely greenway that runs alongside the west side of the site, or the east side, apologies. And this is called the Bear Creek Greenway. And this is a 25-mile long, essentially bike path and pedestrian path that connects a lot of these outlying communities from Ashland to Central Point, running right through the heart of Medford and right along the edge of our site, as we saw in the previous graphic. So when thinking about Medford and thinking about redevelopment, there are a few things that definitely need to be taken into consideration. Affordable housing being one of them, that's something that a lot of cities struggle with. Resilience to environmental factors. I'm sure that everyone has heard of the extreme forest fires that tend to happen on the West Coast. That's still a thing. As I understand, it's definitely getting worse. Post-emergency recovery support. You know, what happens if your house burns down? Who do you go to for assistance? This is really important. And for this place, as all places that we're redeveloping, we need to think about sustainable and responsible development. So, a few statistics to kind of throw at you about Medford. The city has identified that they need over 13,000 new units by 2042. I want to point out that it is estimated around 55% of the inhabitants or the households of Medford are low income to extremely low income, and about 60% of Medford workers commute from outside the city of Medford. This is assumed it's because either A, it's not an affordable place to live, or B, it's not a pleasant enough one to live for the people who can afford it. So I want to dig into those environmental factors a little bit. In 2020, there were numerous fires that started in the state of Oregon. In this region in particular, there was the Alameda Drive fire and the Open Chain fires. They started 25 miles apart. The Alameda Drive fire actually burned along part of the Greenway. It destroyed 2,500 homes and displaced over 4,000 people in the span of a weekend. So what the town decided to do is they appropriated what we know as the Expo Center. This is kind of a rural community center. A lot of kind of livestock shows and things like that happen there. It exists in kind of this area over here on this map. They did an amazing job in making that a place where people could sleep if they had to evacuate their home or had lost their home. But one of the things that I noticed about this place when I was looking at the response is that it's pretty far away from everything else. So people that evacuated to this place didn't have good access to a lot of other resources. Everything that they had there had to be brought to that site specially, and it was actually a real challenge to do. And finally, after that disaster, it was found that around 70% of FEMA applications for assistance to acquire new housing for people who had lost their homes during that disaster were denied. It is assumed that that's because the people who were the most heavily impacted by this disaster were not primarily English speakers, and the paperwork was very, very challenging, and they did not have appropriate support to do that. There are a significant number of non-English speaking people in Oregon and in this region being on the I-5 corridor, and so I think that that's something that needs to be acknowledged. Yes. And that too. I appreciate that. So, these are what brought me to my kind of conceptual design guidelines. You know, we need housing, we need greater resilience, support for what happens after a disaster. And again, still looking at that sustainable development, which I think is a little bit maybe more challenging in suburban areas like this one. So the first thing that I decided to tackle was using up all of this unused parking lot space. This gigantic slab of asphalt is clear most of the time. And so when we're talking about, you know, where can we put people, where can they live, we can put housing on this place. And that also helps clear some of that impermeable pavement as well. One of the other things that was important was making sure that, you know, connections to the existing areas were maintained. I will say that one of the greatest challenges with this site was the fact that I-5 runs right along the edge of this site, and there aren't really any places to cross it aside from the existing one to the south of the site to get from the west side to the east side of Medford. So it's a creek. It's Bear Creek. Yes. Yep. That's what that trail that we talked about runs right alongside. I think it's behind my body right now. Yes. Here, I can stand over here if that's easier. Okay. All right. Oh, excellent. So my thought is that we could phase some of this development, initially looking at the mall, which already exists there. The biggest move there being opening that up, letting it be a breathable space that isn't so inward facing, and making sure that we leave it as intact as possible to maintain a lot of the local businesses that do occupy space there, as well as leaving space for you know, potentially large box retailers and things like that to still exist within the site, and also, provide things to do and resources for the people that would live there and the housing that would be built up around it in later phases. So when we talk about resiliency, I think that we really have to talk about connections, not only physical connections in space, but connections between people. One of the things that I pointed out at the beginning when we talked about the Expo Center as an evacuation point is that there wasn't a lot of access to other resources. If we create a new evacuation point here, at a proposed community center that occupies one of the previous box stores of the reused shopping mall, that would give anyone who either lives here or is required to evacuate to this place really great access to a number of grocery stores, medical offices, and other kind of like necessities and resources that they really might need to rely on because literally their house and everything they had burned down. So that brings me to my next point in looking a little bit more inward in creating greater connections between people. We know that this requires good public spaces. The mall itself is already kind of leading into being a public space, and when it's opened up, we can connect it more to what's around it, such as the Greenway, to create more public plazas where people can gather and connect and celebrate and remember and get to know each other better so that in times of crisis, they know who to talk to and they don't feel like they have to go it alone. So looking a little bit more closely at this idea of a resiliency center reoccupying or newly occupying the most southern box store in this mall, I think that that allows for a great space to address some of those services that we talked about. A centralized translation space where people can go to work on their FEMA paperwork with people who are hopefully experts on it and also experts in their language so that they're not struggling through that alone. Spaces for learning about the environment. Interestingly, fires are supposed to happen in Oregon. It's part of a healthy ecosystem there. They're just particularly severe at this time due to, I think in part, a lack of understanding of what's going on along with climate change, as we know. We can also incorporate performance and media centers where people can go to create amazing podcasts or project emergency news in times of crisis. And we can also have, a bookstore and resource center, which functions something like a library as a third space where people can go to just hang out, learn, and be in a safe place, whether it's an emergency or not. One of the other things that's really great about creating a space like this is it has a lot of really voluminous open areas within, which means that if there is a crisis, those spaces can be pretty easily adapted to accommodate a number of people if they need to sleep there, shelter there more temporarily than that, and otherwise kind of have a safe space to be. And finally, we really do want to try to promote as much sustainable development as we can. I think that regreening a lot of that paving is really important, especially when we think about using indigenous plantings. I do believe that it rains on average about 18 inches a year here, so you have to be quite mindful of what plantings that you're putting in this place because they can overabsorb water. But we do still want water to be able to get to the ground, to be filtered by plantings before it goes to our lovely creek, which is, downhill from all of these things. And finally, thinking of sustainable development from the more human side, we also want to create more walkable communities. So rather than having this massive parking lot, which you are required to drive to and quite honestly drive around because it's so huge, we can create smaller, more intimate, walkable spaces so that people are inspired to be outside, to be in their space, to walk about. And that creates a better environment for people as well as nature. So in summary, just trying to address this site as holistically as possible, looking at housing, looking at resilience, looking at recovery, as well as sustainability. And with that, I would love to open it up to your feedback. Thank you.
The implement of criticism is here.
I'll jump in first. Jessica, thank you very much. That was a lovely presentation. And I'm going to play on a couple of things that you were sharing with us. One of the things that I think is perfectly appropriate is the location for this center, where it's at the heart of resources, right? You can easily get there with goods to bring in to help these people that have been displaced from their homes. And so that way we can start to service their needs as a family to get them back on their feet. I think you've got a wonderful opportunity for healing and growth for those individuals that have lost everything. And that's sort of highlighted at the roofscape and also in your wonderful basin diagram that you shared with us early in your presentation, because the views to these mountains that are all around are spectacular. And the people that are living in the forested area that just lost their home, they're living there for a very good reason, because they really love that environment. And so finding a way to get folks up onto a vista to look back at those wonderful mountains and trees and natural homes, areas that they were living in, is something that, you know, you're starting to tease here with an access up. But I think the entire proposal could be informed by getting people up on the roof to go see that incredible landscape. I also think there's an opportunity for maybe playing a little bit further with how you build a resilient neighborhood against forest fires. And some of that's going to have to learn about how forest fires work, and then also how they heal over time, what they do in sequence. You know, when a forest fire goes through, you get, first thing, very fast growing plants and trees pop up. And then over time, you get more sort of long-term trees that will kind of crowd out the fast growers that spout up. And so, you know, that can actually lead to some really interesting outcomes, because you'll see trails of where a forest fire used to be in the mountains, because the birches that were the fast growers eventually get crowded out by the lodgepole pines, and you'll see that sort of golden line of a 500-year-old forest fire that can lead to a really interesting kind of natural appreciation of the landscape. So that might start to inform kind of how you're imagining the shaping of your blocks and the resilience of your buildings. But that's also, you know, a step towards how you might phase this thing, because you could see like a growing, right? An early stage, so you get fast pop-ups that serve an immediate need, and then you get maybe a more long-term inhabitants that starts to fill in. You know, we had a notion of beds kind of laid out in a large gym-like space, right, to serve the people day one when they just lost their house. But then, you know, how do they live there for a month? How do they live there for a year? How do they live? Maybe they love it here and they want to stay forever. How do they live there for a lifetime? That might be something to start teasing out a little bit more fully in this road to recovery, is sort of trace out the trajectory of folks that are going to, having started from day zero, right, of the whole thing going away, to a lifetime later. And maybe this can support that growth the entire way.
And if I can just pick up from here, I really appreciate the presentation and also your response to the place. I mean, I taught at the University of Oregon, so I'm familiar with the landscape, you know, and the phenomena there. So the fact that you put this kind of glazed sort of structure, this atrium that's transparent, that provides you cover, that's a unique thing that is needed in, you know, that everybody looks for in Oregon. It's wet, you don't want to be outdoors, it's just cold enough not to be pleasant outdoors, but not, you know, enough to, you know, be always inside. So you created this interesting sort of space where I can imagine it could be very successful. And also, I appreciate your response to the river. It's not in the plan. The plan is like it's an earlier version, right? The plan that you showed there. Because I see now that you have this opening towards the river. I would actually embrace it even more, and then start thinking about, you know, the element that's missing here is water. Like you thought about fire, which of course is very important, but the flip side of fire is water. And it's this kind of heavy rain, this idea. So these streets are probably naturally sloping down towards the creek. So, and I don't see a response to it. I feel like, you know, this would be a natural place for stormwater management, for a little bit of an identity, you know, building sort of central axis, but that is not really sort of there yet. It's sort of like just hinted at. So I think that could be the next element, is to, you know, to start thinking about the landscape, these kind of, how it start to participate in the ecology of the place. And then I really appreciate the green roof, I mean, in response to sustainability. So that will also be a part of that water system because it will probably hold a little bit of the water. So I think you have a successful and interesting, successful, and it fits the idea of, or my experience of Oregon, of teaching there. I can see this being actually, appreciated even locally, and particularly this kind of, inside outside connection, which is very strong in California, but it's also in Oregon. So yeah, well done.
Thank you.
I think your presentation, I was quite taken by, and when I first saw that drawing, I think on the screen, it kind of hit me. You have such a powerful connector there. The water, as you say, is not an element that you can do a lot. You can't recreate it. It's there for a reason, and it is a natural thing. It's the authenticity, and this is an amazing drawing showing these sort of green pieces. And I wonder if you just put too much on the site.
Okay.
Okay, so maybe you had a yield that you needed to reach. Couldn't this green start to connect? I understand this was existing, right? The mall is existing. I don't know if housing, there's an ambiguity between the placement of housing near the water, but also near the highway. So you have to think about that. Maybe the housing went here. I don't know. Well,
Well, I was gonna say.
well, it's not as big a highway. I mean, according to this drawing, I don't know much about the highway. But I could really see this sort of green coming in and out. Look, I maybe put the office buildings over here. The other comment I have is, I know you're saying this is mixed use. And what do you mean by mixed use? You have residential here. You've segregated everything. Whereas we know that mixed use works in cities. The pandemic is causing us to rethink the amount of office space we have in cities. And it's going to become more residential. It's going to be called more daycare centers, that sort of thing. And so maybe you could think of it, and that would be a simple way to make this a more integrated area.
Thank you.
Thanks for the presentation. We're looking at an urban design proposition. We're not looking at an architectural proposition. I mean, I'm sorry, we need to be clear about that because it dips in and out of architectural propositions a little bit here, a little bit there, a little bit there, but I don't get a sense of the tectonics or the materiality of them. The strongest aspects of it, my colleague just alluded to this drawing. I mean, this is actually the key to developing this scheme. I've got an issue with why you fill every square millimeter with development, because there's no evidential base. You didn't produce any research which gave the evidence for saying it needs to be that much, or it needs to be that much, or it needs to be that much. It's incumbent upon you, and certainly when you're working in a commercial context, what was the phrase, rat-faced developer, that was used yesterday by Matt? That developer person is going to say, well, why should I pay for all this when actually that will make a better return on my investment? You have to justify why there's this much or this much or this much. You didn't do that. It's a speculation. It's an assertion on your part that this would be a business model which would lead the development here. The clue, I think, as Bill is saying, is actually in the development of that drawing, highway or no highway. I think this is actually what I would, if I was advising you on this strategically, I would say this is a landscape proposal which has buildings integrated into it. You came up with one great phrase, the breathable mall. You didn't really say how it to be achieved, but I like the idea that some ugly pug of a mall is getting perforated and repurposed. Again, you have to, the incumbent, the requirement, the obligation is to examine that mall and show how you're opening it up. There must be drawings of that building.
There are some. They were a challenge to acquire.
Yeah, I understand that, people don't want to give over drawings, but I think it would have been incredibly helpful if you'd been able to analyze that in a much more precise way, because these are, I'm going to say it because I'm a rude European, we don't talk about appreciation or gratitude much. We talk about the things which we see and the way in which perhaps they could be addressed to produce better results, because architecture, the average life of a building in the UK is 90 years. I don't know how long it is in the US. Okay. It's less, but it's a long time. It's more than a working lifetime. That's a kind of interesting thing. I did a big project, which I expected to be knocked over in 40 years. Actually, they refurbished it. I was amazed. So that repair and reuse strategy there, that's a great idea. That's responsible architecture. That's responsible urbanism. But the strongest element in this region is this greenway. This is a wonderful thing. You alighted on this, you drew out its importance. I think there's something about orientating these elements in a wilderness of green with integrated waterways that come into here that start to perforate and make the whole of the thing, not just the mall, breathe. And then I think this becomes a kind of, it's an Oregonian Venice, with courtyards going down to an expanded and widened creek, and the tributaries of the creek suffusing the whole of this site. It becomes a kind of romantic idea of mixed-use development and residential development and the breathable mall in a waterway, in a forest, in a wilderness. It's overdevelopment, I think, the way it is. I'm sorry. I said before that we're not meant to deal with absolutes, but I think it's wrong-minded, the amount of development you've got here.
Okay.
Let everything breathe. Vital. Thank you.
I actually went through this area for the very first time a year and a half ago, driving from San Francisco to Seattle, where my son is. And I'd never been to the West Coast north of San Francisco, and it was fascinating to go up along the California coast, but then you come in and it's very different once you get to cross over to I-5 and head up through this area, the Rogue Valley, and then Wilmette Valley, et cetera. Couple things just to talk in the big picture. I think the presentation for me, what I was missing in Raphael's was the kind of investigation a little bit in the presentation of your sketches and studies and things. You have that, and I was kind of looking for that maybe with Raphael. And then you have the diagrams that start to talk about conveying information. Those are very strong, and those are always good to share when you're doing things. So I think that's very good. And you really gave a good punch and articulation to a major diagram of here's how I fit within the scheme of Phoenix up to Medford and the Greenway. So graphically, these things come together very good to communicate information. Because remember, when you're presenting these things to a larger body, people are just looking at you. You've been in it for months, and all of a sudden you're asking people to, in 5 minutes, kind of take a look at. So those all help a great deal. I was fascinated by the idea of culture and place. I think that with Raphael's, I was looking for what it was the place, what was it telling you? This one, you started to get into that a little bit about the people the mountains, et cetera. So I thought that that was very good. And then, and with the exception of the center, to take care of those who have been burned out, I was kind of looking for maybe the next evolution, the next steps would be, what about this place, the culture of the place, the people, their history and culture that would start to infuse and inform the plan and inform the place also. You've got an emergency response, but what about the day-to-day, the street life, the places you're going? And then getting back to the landscape. Landscape is a huge part of our work. We're always landing somewhere and understanding. And you started to address that, and you have. But like some of the other guys have said, and Barbara and earlier and stuff, I think the place and how the urban form and the urbanism of the place starts to react to the context of the physical landscape is really important. There was a creek next, there was was it Marley or, yeah, Marley Creek, and then here you've got the major creek. I'm kind of longing for maybe more integration of understanding that that creek is there, and whether it's through storm water or actually just, creating ways for water and view shed to take you back to that major resource is really something. I applaud you on the idea of looking at affordable housing and how to incorporate that, because it's basically something that's happening worldwide. What was going to be your next step after this? If you had like another 2 to 3 weeks, what would you have done?
So actually, the next thing that I really did want to look at was the water and the way that it moves across the site, because I will admit that I don't have it represented particularly strongly. But, we sort of have this like downhill situation that happens towards the creek, as you would expect. And so I think my hope would be to create this sort of series of layers that catch the stormwater as it moves through, and integrating a little bit more of the water capture, of these buildings, because it does rain so little. How can we make the most out of that? And so I think that that would be my next step.
Who's next? Is Barbara here?
I'll go again.
Yeah, I do think that there's also, you were talking about next steps, like opportunity to explore that ground floor plan. Much like the Raphael scheme, like it's not all retail. There's going to be a loading component. There's going to be all kinds of services, and how do you get goods in and out of this? How do you get downstairs to go park your car and all that good stuff? And just sort of infusing that with that level of understanding, because there are preferred streets, right? The main axes coming in, and then you get the secondary or alleys that are kind of supporting all that. So starting to organize those a little bit around, where do I want my people? Where do I want the trucks? Where do I want the cars? Maybe they're intermixing, maybe they're not. Maybe there's fewer of them because we're going to strip out some of the building mass that's been put on the site. But those are opportunities for kind of enriching the ground floor plan. I would also infuse it with a little bit more program types. I know we've talked about mixed use, and that seems like, but like things like hotel, or like I was talking about, how do you imagine a person living here after a disaster? Well, you give them a hotel to stay in. That might start to give them some services that allow them to build their home. Or maybe there's other types of living typologies, that short term, long term. Maybe there's a dormitory, I don't know, that could start to house people in a little bit different circumstance. So that infusion of expand on mixed use. What does that mean? That's a sort of catch-all for a lot of different things, but let's see all the different programs. Because if you're going to make this a part of the city, it's not just a monoculture of things. It's got to have all the variation of color mixed in that makes a city work. And so starting to understand that, starting at the ground floor and going up, then that I think will add a lot of richness to the diagram.
Yeah, I agree. I think that diagram should be a patchwork of color. That's what cities are about. And I'm a little worried even about the amount of retail that you have in the middle of this whole thing. And I'd like to see it dispersed. Maybe, I mean, this reminds me of Savannah. They have the retail that runs down the middle, and it's two-sided retail. Nobody wants two-sided retail. But this is a retail front, and this might be a retail front. As Professor Bell said, that's where we change uses maybe and architecture. So that's something to think about.
I think retail at the street
All
level.
retail.
I was thinking of leaving a lot of this as retail or maybe like medical offices, things like that. And then kind of letting the retail occupy the ground levels of a lot of these buildings kind of through here, especially, and then letting this be more housing. And the reason why I decided upon that was because it's a little bit more secluded in this area. You did call out the highway, but there's a rise before you get to the highway and there's this buffer of trees. So in my thinking, I was like, maybe this can be just this sort of like maybe more quiet, secluded pocket, and we'll keep a lot of the retail and a lot of the activity maybe more up to this side of the site.
As I'm listening to this, I have a question. When you went through the presentation, you talked about the demographics a little bit and that there was a high concentration, I think it was over 50% of economically challenged residents here. And there was about the housing. Could you talk, I mean, and then you said people couldn't afford to live here, but then it was, you know, economic challenge. I'm having a hard time getting my arms around what is Medford and then who and how does that come? Because, you know, we have a lot of Hispanic people who are here, I guess, that are working in the area, right? I don't know the area, and that's what I'm asking. And then how does that then start to inform the program and then how you not only lay out, but how it's go? You were just talking about a lot of retail, and is the buying power for that retail actually there, or is it more bringing in services to help? Well, just services in general to help people, you know, make the transitions. Or could you take part of that mall and create affordable housing potentially out of that, or taking a piece out? You know, these little interventions and things. I mean, the place to me is always where I just in the history, you know, we talked about what's the mall, the history of the mall, and what was there. And Raphael did a great history of like malls and stuff like that. He didn't say what was on the site before, but here there seems to be, you know, an opportunity for the infusion of the city, maybe a little differently. So I'm really interested in how that starts to inform this, because, you know, that's where your layering of the richness of what is happening here, and getting back to the people that will be using it. So a little bit about the people, a little bit about the place. How did you think about that, and how that you're hearing us talk about, might you go forward on that?
One way to do it is food. Like, you know, this is why Medford is there. I mean, this is a very agricultural production area. It's also where most of the water in Oregon lands, because we're going to also north to south. So it's very rich. So a farmer's market sort of event, you know, if you look at Eugene, for instance, that is where affordable food, farm, you know, fresh food. A lot of them are farmers.
I
Logging.
would say that many are. Logging is something that is significant. It was in decline for a long time, but it's picked back up a little bit. Interestingly, the sort of more agricultural aspects of this area, I think, have also been in decline. A lot of the orchards have been removed, which were very characteristic of this place, and things like that. So it's kind of in this point of transition right now, I would say, where it's kind of trying to figure out where it's going as well.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
What is the place like? Sorry, what is the place like, the city? Is it, you said it seemed like it might be economically challenged, but then it sounded like it might not be.
So
It's just probably like every other city where it's a mix, right?
it's definitely a mix. There is a very, shall I say, like successful medical industry in this region. A lot of retirees here, so there are a lot of, I think, more economically secure individuals who are affiliated with the medical system and the hospital system and things like that, and that's very, very prominent. But there are other aspects of the community which are a lot less advantaged, if that makes sense.
Mhm. Okay.
Thing I want to say about this plan is that it almost seems like it's kind of like if the downtown is to the south, I assume, I would, this is kind of a transition area with a lot of kind of gaps. And then you have all the kind of loading of most of the density and the uses up here. I would have actually flipped the thing and I would have created sort of a boundary as it gets closer to the urban growth boundary that every Oregon city has, where, farmland begins. I would have flipped the density over here, assuming that most people will want to come on foot or by bike from downtown. And that's what I thought, maybe a use that relates to the community, like a farmer's market, like an established place for trading local goods, local produce. That might be a good thing to do, and an anchor and an attractor like that will actually bring people. But I feel like you put a roundabout here first. Now then there's like a little pocket park. So I'm not sure if you I feel like you've been thinking about it, but you haven't really landed on the right sort of gateway.
Yes, so actually downtown in this map is here. And then we have, right, so this is downtown Medford. This whole span is approximately 1.25 miles. So I actually walked this walk last May to kind of see how it feels. And it was not bad. One of the interesting things, this is a sidebar, the Greenway as a path, which is a paved, pretty lovely pedestrian path, didn't even come up on Google Maps as a potential route, which I thought was really interesting. And that's kind of one of the reasons why I wanted to call attention to it is a lot of these connections already exist. People just don't use them or they don't know about them. And so part of this is trying to call a little bit of attention to that as well.
My finishing comment, hearing the input that everyone has put into this, you've got a great start. I do think you've got a couple more, 2 to 3 more weeks if you can do it, to go back and make it a finer cut.
Okay.
And I believe if you go back in there thinking about and labeling where downtown is and things like that, make it clearer for everybody. This is going to be an important part of your portfolio, and this is what we're all going to be seeing. So you should think about enhancing this because you know the answers. You've heard some comments. Now you could make some other judgments, and this could be a really great urban plan.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
I would, as part of this, I'd kind of document the whole place, as I mentioned, and the culture and the background and all that a little bit. So it's very clear of how things started to come and the need for the affordable housing and everything. This is a very interesting project because of where it is, and you know it. And there's the urban moves that we've all talked about, but this is a very exciting project, and it might be worth even sharing with the elected officials and people in that. Did you live there, grow up there, or
I
do you
grew
know?
up there, yes.
Okay, well then you definitely need to go back and say, hey, I've been working on this in school, and I'd like to share some thoughts with you. A lot of times things start, where's the mall now? Is the mall hurting, or is it,
It's
so?
it's in decline. I wouldn't say it's abandoned yet. There are still a lot of businesses within it. People do still go there. It's just at a vastly
Are there a
reduced
lot of
kind
empty stores in it?
capacity.
Okay,
Yeah.
then it's worth talking to your city hierarchy about just some ideas. And all you're gonna do is lay it out. You're not saying, hey, you guys need to do this, but you might just lay it out and share. A lot of times, as architects, we have an opportunity to help shape where things go. And a lot of times we just don't do it. So what I'd say is just, you might share that and see if it doesn't start to get a little positive brush fire going in the right direction.
One more, yeah.
Okay.
Fatal or final?
Oh, wow. Okay. That's amazing.
Piccolo mondo.
Incredible.
I've got one final thought. If the money in the area is coming from pharma, medical stuff, why not put the biggest economic driver on the left-hand side of the site and find a way of paying for this? Because what you described before was, and colleague drew attention to it, there ain't going to be the buying power to support the retail unless you put the biggest economic driver in the region on the site. Just a thought.
Thank
This idea of the connection between thesis and built reality often escapes students in thesis. And there was a student at Syracuse University who came down to Baltimore after completing his thesis. And there was a plan to build a new ballpark for the Orioles. And the plan involved the tearing down of the long warehouse building that is in right field. And this student showed his thesis, which was to take this thing that was thought of as a liability, incorporate it into the ballpark design, and create a more traditional ballpark out of it. And fundamentally, I think it was HOK Sport or one of those people saw the brilliance of the project and executed it very much the way Eric, I'm trying to think of Eric's last name. He's a principal now at Air St. Croix. But these things, oh my God, life, he's now retired, but he's had so much impact. Yeah. So this is the ability to cause change in these things. I wish more of the students were here, and I wish some of the students were here from Architecture 797 to hear that. It is powerful because you are an honest broker coming to the scene. You don't necessarily have an interest financially in any of this stuff, and it allows people to look at this and change their minds. Anyhow, I'm going to ask another honest broker, Professor Matthews, the chair of the committee, to bring us to a conclusion so that our hungry guests can all run upstairs and get something to eat.
Okay. Jessica, thank you so much for a very ambitious project that asked us to look at adaptive reuse, master planning, resiliency, as well as sustainability, right? And you reknitted all of these things together in a very short amount of time. So what a lot of you don't know is halfway through Jessica's year-long project, she abandoned a site in Washington, D.C. She wanted to look at something that was landscape-oriented. She was interested in sustainability, and she thought I should do something local, but her heart was always with Medford. And I've managed to fall in love with Medford, Oregon, through working with Jessica. I appreciate it. That's all I have to say. You've done well. It was all you, and you're here. Thank you. Thanks for letting me be on this journey with you.
So for our guest reviewers and faculty colleagues, lunch is provided upstairs in the conference room, what we used to call the faculty conference room, which somehow now has become the dean's conference room. Interesting. Power plays everywhere. It's upstairs in the executive suite, main office. For the students that are thesis students, if you would all work together to transform the presentation. We're going to start here after we come back at 2 p.m. So Aaron will be over here. Ploy will be there. The back side of this panel will be, who is it? Yeah, and then concluding with Daisy on the back side of that panel. Thank you very much. And prompts from the back of the room, very helpful. Okay, so we'll be back here at 2 p.m. Sharp. Everybody should be ready, and we'll talk for about 4 hours, and then we'll all kind of try to do a recap of what it is we saw, if we can remember what we saw. And also thank you to any of the reviewers that might be leaving at this point.